Okay, let's untack this. I want you to do something for me right now. If you're driving, please keep your eyes on the road, but maybe just visualize this. If you're at home, you can literally do it. Look down. We are starting today with a question that, I have to say, it sounds like it belongs on a sticky trivia card you'd find at the bottom of a beer glass in a dive bar.
Right, yeah, for 10 points.
Exactly. But according to the, well, massive stack of research notes and articles we have on the table today, this one question is actually the key to unlocking the entire architecture of human biology.
It's a question that has, it's bothered philosophers, biologists, and, curious kids for literally thousands of years.
It really has. And the question is, why do men have nipples?
It just sounds so incredibly trivial when you say it out loud, doesn't it?
It sounds like a joke. It sounds like the setup to a punchline I'm not sure I want to hear. But what we are going to find out in this deep dive is that the answer to that question isn't just a biological quirk. It takes us into a massive, sprawling conversation about embryology, the power of hormones, the deep roots of human behavior, and, believe it or not, starving prisoners of war in World War II.
It really does. It covers the entire spectrum of the human experience, from the microscopic to the, to the historic. And I think what's fascinating here, what makes this so approachable, is that the source material we are working with today is not your standard dry academic medical textbook.
Oh, not at all.
It's dense with science, yes, but the voice. The voice is so distinct.
Absolutely. The author of our main source material is actually, he's quite critical of modern scientific writing. He has this wonderful chip on his shoulder about how boring science has become.
Yeah, you can feel that on every page.
He explicitly mentions that he prefers the company of what he calls the grandfather of biology, Aristotle, over most of his modern biologist colleagues.
Which is a bold stance to take in the scientific paper.
It is a very bold stance. He has this great line where he says, judging by the mind-numbing studies of chimp testicles, many scientists seem to believe there is an inverse proportion between humor and rigor.
Which is a pretty biting critique, but he has a point. Biology is weird, it's messy, and a lot of the time it's genuinely funny.
Exactly. He's basically saying, why does science have to be so sterile, so lifeless? And he leans so heavily on Aristotle because Aristotle believed in teleology.
Teleology. Now, that is a concept we absolutely need to define before we go any further.
Right. I was just about to ask. Break that down for us. What is teleology?
Okay, so teleology is essentially the philosophical study of nature by attempting to describe things in terms of their apparent purpose, their function, their goal or directive principle.
Oh, everything has a point.
That was Aristotle's view, exactly. Nature does nothing in vain. Everything in biology is there for a reason. If a bird has a particular kind of beak, it's to crack a particular kind of seed. If a fish has fins, it's to swim. There's a purpose behind every design.
Okay, that makes sense. So Aristotle looks at the human body and assumes every single part has a job to do. No spare parts.
Precisely. But here is where the conflict arises, and this is really the hook of our entire discussion today. Aristotle had a student, a protege, named Theophrastus.
The rebellious student. I love this dynamic already.
In a way, yes. A very academic rebellion. So Theophrastus, in what the source calls a scientific spirit of spite, pointed to male nipples as the ultimate counter-argument to Aristotle's entire worldview.
He used the male chest to troll his professor.
Effectively, yes, a 2,000-year-old troll. He basically said, okay, master, if nature has a point for everything, explain these.
What's the purpose here?
Exactly. He cited them as the prime example of biological uselessness. He argued that they serve no function, they produce no milk, they're just there, baggage.
So you have the master saying everything has a purpose, and the student pointing and saying, look at men's chests. That is useless equipment.
That's the debate in a nutshell.
So who wins this ancient argument? Where do we land?
Well, that is the mission of this deep dive, to explore the source's argument that Aristotle was actually right.
He was right.
He was. There is a point. But, and this is a very big, but to find it, you have to stop looking at men as a completely separate category. You have to stop looking at male and female as two totally distinct alien species and start looking at the master template of humanity.
The master template. Okay.
And that leads us to the biggest takeaway, really the headline of this entire episode. If you want to understand men, if you want to understand why they have nipples or why they act the way they do, you have to understand that they are essentially Well, they're modified women.
Modified women, that is a statement.
Biologically speaking, yes, that is the fundamental reality. The source material is very, very clear on this point. The master template, the default setting of all human organisms is female.
Let's dig into that, because I think a lot of people, myself included, have this idea of the Y chromosome, the thing that makes a man as this mighty conqueror.
Right.
We picture it storming in on day one of conception and, building a man from the ground up with its own unique blueprint. But that's not what happens, is it?
No, it's not like that at all. It's much more subtle. It's more like a renovation than a new construction.
A renovation. I like that.
If we look at the timeline of human gestation, for the first month or so, every single human embryo develops more or less as a female. We all start on the exact same path.
We're all Eve before we are Adam.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And medically, it holds up. In those early weeks, the embryo has structures that can become either male or female, but the default trajectory, the path of least resistance, is female.
What are those structures?
Well, we have these things called Mullerian ducts, which are the precursors to the female reproductive tract, so the uterus, fallopian tubes, and so on. We also have Wolffian ducts, which are the potential male plumbing.
So we have both sets of plans initially.
We do. And in a default scenario, if nothing else happens, the female system develops from the Mullerian ducts and the male system, the Wolffian ducts, it fades away, it withers.
So if you just leave the embryo completely alone, it becomes female.
Exactly. Nature requires an active intervention to create a male. It's an extra step.
When does that step happen?
Around week 7. And at this point, the embryo is tiny, maybe a centimeter long. That is when the divergence happens. If and only if you inherit a Y chromosome, a specific gene on that chromosome called the SRY gene activates.
SRY, that sounds like a secret agent.
It kind of acts like one. It's the trigger. It's the signal that tells the primitive gonads, okay, you're going to become testes instead of ovaries.
And once that happens, the whole game changes.
The whole game changes because once those testes form, they start pumping out hormones. And the source uses a very, very vivid metaphor for this process.
Oh, I loved this part. He says the embryo is pickled.
It's pickled in a series of hormonal brews.
It paints such a clear picture. You're just floating there, basically female in your development, and then suddenly the chemistry of the whole environment changes and you're being marinated in something completely different.
And this marinade is primarily androgens, specifically testosterone. But it's incredibly important to understand, and the source really stresses this, that this isn't a single switch being flipped.
Right.
It's not like a light switch goes from female to male and suddenly everything changes at once.
Okay, hold on. This is where I got a little confused because I always thought the Y chromosome just turned on and that was it. A binary thing. How can it not be a switch?
It's not a switch. It's a sequence. The source describes it almost like a time series of ocean waves hitting a shore.
Waves of hormones.
Exactly. Think of it like a really complex construction project where different specialized crews come in at different times. The Y chromosome signals the production of testosterone, sure, but different parts of the developing body are sensitive to that testosterone at different times. We call these critical periods.
So wave 1 hits, and that changes. What exactly?
Well, one wave might hit at week 8, for example, and its job is to change the external genitals. It fuses what would have been the labia to form a scrotum. It grows the phallus. But at that exact moment, the brain might not be receptive yet.
So the brain is just ignoring that first wave.
It is. The receptors aren't active. Then, a few weeks later, another different wave comes along, and this one is timed perfectly to change a specific structure in the brain, like the hypothalamus, for instance.
And then another one after that?
Maybe. A third wave might hit a different part of the nervous system. It is a slow, methodical, piece-by-piece masculinization of the primeval female embryo.
And this distinction between the different waves is crucial, right? Because the source makes a big point that because these waves happen at different times, they can be interrupted or disconnected from each other.
Correct. And this, by the way, is how the nipple mystery gets solved.
Right. I was waiting for this. Connect the dots for us.
Well, think about the timing. The nipples form very, very early in development. They're part of that basic default female template we just talked about.
So they're in the original blueprint.
They're in the original blueprint. They are laid down before the big testosterone waves really kick in to masculinize the rest of the body. By the time the make me a man hormonal signal is strong enough to change things like genitals and brain structures, the nipples are already there.
So the construction crew for the nipples showed up, built them according to the default plan, and then left before the foreman arrived with the revised blueprints for the male chest.
That is a perfect analogy, exactly that. And because nipples don't really get in the way of being a male, I mean, they aren't metabolically expensive to keep around, nature just leaves them there. It would actually take more evolutionary energy and a whole new genetic instruction to delete them than to just leave them as a vestige.
So Theophrastus was wrong. They aren't useless. They are evidence.
They are evidence of our shared origin.
Hmm.
Precisely. They are a little souvenir from our time as a female template. But let's go back to those waves, because the implications go way, way beyond anatomy. They get into behavior, psychology, everything.
Yeah.
Most of these baths or waves happen before birth, in utero, and those pre-birth waves are primarily affecting the brain and the formation of the genitals. But then after birth, there's a long, long pause, a hormonal quiet period.
Until puberty.
Right. At puberty, what the source calls a hormonal tsunami hits, a massive, overwhelming wave. But that one primarily changes the body. It deepens the voice, triggers hair growth, builds muscle mass.
So just to be clear, you have the pickling in the womb that wires the brain and forms the basic equipment, and then you have the tsunami years later that changes the chassis, so to speak.
You've got it. That's the sequence. And here is where it gets really, really interesting, and where we start to see the true complexity of human biology. The source emphasizes that if an in utero hormone surge does not take...
You mean doesn't take...
Well, if for some reason that specific wave doesn't wash over the embryo at the right time, or if the receptors in a specific part of the brain are blocked, or if the timing is just slightly off, then that specific aspect of the embryo does not change to a male orientation. It stays on the default female path.
So it's not an all-or-nothing package deal. You don't just get the male package.
It is absolutely not. You can have the wave that changes the genitals, but for whatever reason, you miss the wave that changes a specific part of the brain related to, say, spatial reasoning, or vice versa.
This completely upends the whole men are from Mars, women are from Venus binary.
It shatters it.
It sounds more like men are from Venus, but they went through a specific multi-stage car wash on the way out, and some of them missed the waxing cycle.
That is a surprisingly accurate analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to prove this, to show this isn't just theory, the source dives into a phenomenon that we colloquially call tomboys.
Now, this is a term we've all heard. And usually it just means a girl who likes sports or climbing trees. But the source suggests there is a deep biological underpinning here, right? It's not just about a girl deciding she likes the color blue instead of pink.
No, not at all. The source argues that this specific pattern of behavior is rooted in that prenatal chemistry we just discussed.
So it's not a choice, it's a predisposition.
That's the argument. And to back this up, the source cites specific well-known studies, most notably by researchers like Anke Ehrhart of Columbia University and another, S.A. Barenbaum. They looked at a condition called congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or CAH.
Okay, that's a mouthful. Break that down for us. What is CAH?
Right. Without getting too bogged down in the deep pathology, CAH is a genetic condition where the adrenal glands, which sit on top of your kidneys, they malfunction.
Okay.
In a female fetus, genetically XX, these malfunctioning glands produce abnormally high levels of androgens, or male hormones, while she is still in the womb.
So let me get this straight. These are genetically female individuals, but during that critical pickling phase, they accidentally got a big splash of the male brule.
Exactly. They got a testosterone bath that is usually reserved for boys.
Yeah.
And the findings from studying these girls are just fascinating because they directly challenge the nurture argument. You know, the idea that girls only like dolls because society tells them to like dolls.
And that's because these girls were raised as girls, right? I mean, their parents didn't treat them like boys or anything.
That's the critical part of the study.
Yeah.
Correct. They were identified as female at birth, their anatomy was female, and they were raised with all the typical social conditioning of girls in their culture.
But their behavior was different.
Strikingly different. The researchers observed them over years, and the data showed that compared to their own sisters who didn't have CAH and weren't exposed to those hormones, these girls exhibited significantly more aggression.
Aggression in what sense? Like physical fighting? Or just being more assertive?
More like what developmental psychologists call rough and tumble play. So yes, more wrestling, pushing, high-energy physical dominance games, the kind of play stereotypically associated with boys.
Okay.
But the most striking data, and this is the part that usually gets people talking and becomes controversial, came from toy preference.
This is always the controversial part, yeah. The nature-nurture of it all.
It is. The researchers set up a room and offered the children a wide variety of toys. When given a choice, the girls with CAH consistently and statistically significantly chose balls over books, demolition over dolls, and building houses over playing house.
Demolition over dolls. That is a very distinct preference.
It is. And it wasn't just a fleeting interest, which is important. The duration of play mattered, too. They found that these girls played with toy cars for the exact same amount of time, on average, that boys typically did.
Which is much longer than girls without CAH.
Much longer. The source argues that this strongly suggests a biological predisposition for certain types of interaction with the physical world, a preference for dynamic, object-oriented play.
But it went beyond just what they played with, right? It actually affected their cognitive skills. Because usually we think of skills as something you learn, not something you're born with a talent for.
That's the common assumption, that it's all practice. But the study showed these girls, as a group, performed better at spatial tests, at object rotation tests, where you have to mentally imagine how a shape looks if you turn it upside down.
Right.
And finding hidden shapes within a larger, complex pattern. These are all cognitive areas where boys, on average, statistically tend to excel.
And the source mentioned something called grand hand-eye coordination. What's that?
Right. Grand meaning large-scale movements. So things like throwing a ball at a target or catching a frisbee. They excelled at this. But, and this is the fascinating trade-off, they performed worse at minute hand-eye coordination.
And that would be?
Things like handwriting or threading a needle, fine motor control.
Which are, again, traits often statistically associated with girls.
Precisely. So that single prenatal hormonal bath seemed to boost the male typical skill set, spatial reasoning targeting, and at the same time suppress the female typical skill set like fine motor control, and in some studies, verbal fluency, even though the child was genetically female and raised as a girl.
The part of this that really stuck out to me in this section, though, was the discussion about cultural markers. Because you can always argue, okay, maybe she likes cars because cars are objectively cool. But the source talks about how these girls reject very specific feminine things.
Yes, this is a key part of the nature argument the source is building. It's a very clever point. The source observes that these girls often reject things like jewelry, makeup, and intricate hairstyles.
Things their culture tells them girls should like.
Exactly. Now, the author makes a very clever logical maneuver here. He points out that in many cultures throughout history and across the world, men do wear makeup. Men do wear jewelry and colorful, ornate clothes.
Right, you can think of historical French courtiers with their powdered wigs and makeup, or the Woodabab men in Niger who wear elaborate makeup for courtship dances. It's not inherently female.
Exactly. So if men wearing makeup varies by culture, then wearing makeup itself isn't a biological imperative, it's cultural. There is no gene for lipstick. But these girls who are told by their specific culture that they, as girls, should wear makeup and jewelry, they reject it instinctively.
So despite all the social pressure to be feminine in the way their society defines it, their biological drive, that testosterone bath, is saying, no, I don't want the decoration, I want the function.
That's the implication. The argument is that the testosterone surge creates a brain that, on some level, prefers utility over ornamentation, or perhaps dominance displays over courtship displays. They have female genitalia, they are raised as girls, yet they have this instinctive rejection of the accoutrements associated with the female role in their specific society.
It's because that specific hormonal wave in the womb modified their brain's preferences before culture ever had a chance to weigh in.
That's the argument.
It really challenges the idea that we are a blank slate when we are born. It sounds like the slate already has a lot of writing on it before we even see the light of day.
It absolutely does. And this leads us directly into perhaps the most nuanced and, I think, important part of the source material. How this hormonal logic applies to the whole spectrum of sexuality and gender.
Right.
Because if we accept that these waves come in sequences and can be partial, or you can miss one, then the middle ground isn't an anomaly, it's just a mathematical probability.
The source calls it the no man's land.
That's the term it uses, yes. And I want to be really clear about the tone here. The source is arguing forcefully against the idea that people who fall in the middle of this spectrum are mistakes or biological errors.
Right. He explicitly says tragic genetic mistake. Nope.
Correct. He frames it entirely through the lens of evolutionary strategy. He argues that if nature didn't want this kind of diversity, we wouldn't have it. Biology is, at its core, brutally efficient. If a trait doesn't work, if it doesn't help survival or reproduction in some way, it gets weeded out over time.
So the very existence of this diversity proves it has a purpose.
That's his point. He suggests that butch girls and femboys, as he phrases it, are viable gene reproduction strategies. They are winners in the long, hard competition to survive. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist in such large numbers throughout all of human history and across all cultures.
So diversity isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's part of the design.
Exactly. In nature, diversity is almost always a survival asset. It provides resilience to a species. But let's go back to the mechanism, what the source calls the improvisation of nature. Remember those ways we talked about, the construction crews showing up at different times?
The hormonal ocean, yeah.
The source explains that these waves aren't rigid clockwork. Nature improvises. It's not a perfect system. So sometimes an embryo gets the full dose of testosterone required for male genitals, but, and this is a crucial part, it skips the wave that influences sexual attraction.
Or the one for spatial reasoning.
Yeah.
Or aggression.
Right. Any combination. The Course gives a very specific and slightly humorous example to illustrate this uncoupling of traits. He says to imagine a male who didn't get the particular hormonal surge for interior decoration suppression.
I laughed out loud at that. And he connects it to a deep love for Katharine Hepburn movies.
It's a bit of a stereotype, obviously, but he's using it to illustrate the biological point. The biological input for male body happened. He has the Wolffian ducts developed, the Müllerian ducts regressed, but the specific input for certain male typical preferences in the brain it didn't happen. That wave was missed.
Or you can take the reverse example he gives, a female who received just a single isolated testosterone bath in the room.
And that one bath, hitting at just the right time, was enough to give her an attraction to girls, a compulsion to tell public jokes, and a love for the sport of rugby.
But she's female in every other way.
Exactly. She's female in her anatomy, her fertility, all of it. But those specific traits, humor, attraction, aggression, were tweaked by that one wave hitting the amygdala or the hypothalamus at just the right moment in her development.
This brings us to my absolute favorite analogy in the entire text, and I think this is the most helpful way for our listeners to visualize this complex science. The buffet.
The genetic buffet. I love this concept. It makes it so intuitive.
It really does. The idea that when we are in utero, our developing genes are metaphorically walking down a buffet line holding a tray.
It's a perfect visualization. Imagine the embryo moving down this line, and there are all these different hormone tides available in the steam trays on the buffet table.
So the source gives this scenario. A fetus says, okay, I'm building a person here. Let's see. I'll take the penis, please. Yes. And ooh, I'll take the engineering talent. And a beard for later.
Yeah.
But, you know what? I'm going to skip the aggression. I'd rather not have that. It looks a little greasy today.
And voila, as the source says, the sensitive new age guy is born. He has the male hardware, the male body, but he lacks the behavioral software for dominance or high aggression.
And then you have the flip side. Another fetus goes down the line and says, okay, no Y chromosome for me. I'll take the vagina. I'll take the classic waist-to-hip ratio. Oh, and I'll definitely take that creepy telepathy regarding relationships.
Which is the source's very humorous way of describing high emotional intuition and the ability to read subtle social cues and microexpressions.
Right, knowing exactly what your boyfriend is hiding just by the twitch of his eye. But then this fetus reaches over to the other side of the buffet line and grabs the hyena-style testosterone surge.
The aggression, the inability to admit being wrong, the drive to dominate a social hierarchy.
And the source says, voila, my girlfriend is born.
It is humorous and obviously uses stereotypes, but it underscores a really profound biological point. We tend to think of male and female as two distinct set menus. You order the number 1 or you order the number 2. No substitutions allowed.
Right.
But biology is actually an a la carte menu. It's a buffet.
You can order the burger, but you can swap the fries for a side salad. Or get both.
Exactly. And this explains why we have such a rich, beautiful variety of personalities and identities. The source also touches on this idea of intuitive recognition. The idea that because of these hormonal mixtures, we unconsciously recognize sameness in other people.
You mean like straight men hanging out with other straight men or gay men finding each other in a crowd?
Yes. The source argues that however much we might officially deny it or try to be polite in modern society, we have an intuitive radar for people who have eaten from the same buffet as us. It's a kind of biological resonance. We recognize the behavioral cues, the ways of thinking that match our own internal wiring.
That's fascinating. So we've covered the womb, we've covered the pickling process and the buffet. But I want to pause here because we focus so heavily on the very beginning of life. But the hormonal story doesn't just end when we are born, does it?
No, absolutely not. That's just the prologue to the story. The source transitions from the womb to the rest of life, pointing out that we are constantly subject to these pre-programmed chemical timers. We're essentially walking, talking chemical reactions our entire lives.
We mentioned the tsunami of puberty earlier, which sets us up for the dating games. That's the high testosterone, high estrogen era of our teens and 20s, when reproduction is the primary biological driver.
Right, but then come the midlife shifts. And this is a section that I think is often overlooked but is so relevant to so many people. The source looks at this through the lens of evolutionary psychology.
Okay, so what is that exactly?
It's the idea that our modern behaviors and biological processes happen because they helped our ancient ancestors survive and reproduce on the Pleistocene savanna.
This is the caveman logic argument. Our bodies are running on ancient software.
That's a great way to put it. Our bodies are essentially ancient hardware trying to run modern software. We were biologically designed for a world where you had children at 16 and you were considered an elder by 35. Our timers are set to that world, not our modern one.
So let's break down that timeline. What happens at age 35? Because in our modern world, 35 is considered young, but biologically, what's going on?
Biologically, it's a major turning point. For men, testosterone levels start to dip. It's a slow decline, but it's consistent. The source describes this as a biological shift from a mating strategy to a parenting strategy.
Why does that shift happen? What's the evolutionary advantage?
Well, think about the energy costs. High testosterone is metabolically expensive. It fuels muscle growth, aggression, risk-taking behavior, and a high sex drive. All things that are great for competing for and finding new mates when you're 20.
But not so great later on.
Not so helpful when you, in the ancestral environment, likely have several offspring who are dependent on you. They need your protection and your resources. So the aggressive drive to conquer new mates lessens, and the chemical signals to stick around, protect the cave, and provide for your existing children increase.
So the dad bod and the general dad chill is actually a programmed survival mechanism.
It's a feature, not a bug. Nature is chemically sedating the male to ensure he doesn't abandon his genetic investment. It's good for the kids.
And what about for women at 35? Is it the same?
The trajectory is quite different. The source describes women at this age as becoming extra horny as their fertility begins to lessen. The biological clock starts ticking very, very loud.
This is the evolutionary last call at the bar.
That's a crude way to put it, but it's biologically accurate. The body senses that the reproductive window is starting to close, so it ramps up the drive to reproduce one last time before it's too late. It's a final surge of evolutionary effort to get genes into the next generation.
Then we hit the big 50.
Age 50. For men, the source links the classic midlife crisis, the sports car, the sudden urge to climb a mountain, to the lessening of fertility. It's a sort of last-ditch psychological attempt to prove virility. But for women, it's the onset of menopause. And I want to spend a moment here because the source offers a very specific and compelling theory on why menopause even happens.
Yeah, this is important because in most of the animal kingdom, animals usually breed until they drop, right? You don't see a chimpanzee retiring to Florida.
Exactly. Humans, and a few species of whales, are unique in having this long post-reproductive life. Most animals die shortly after they can no longer reproduce. So why do human women live for decades after their ovaries shut down? It's an evolutionary puzzle.
So what's the theory?
It's called the grandmother hypothesis. The source argues that menopause happens because, at a certain age, pregnancy becomes too dangerous for the mother. Evolutionarily speaking, childbirth is incredibly risky. If an older mother dies in childbirth, her existing children, who might still be dependent on her, are at a huge risk of dying too.
So nature shuts down the baby factory to protect the existing assets, the children she already has.
Correct. But it goes further than that. It doesn't just shut her down. It creates a new, incredibly valuable asset, the grandmother.
Okay.
The source refers to grandmother's lore. In a small tribal setting, having an elder female who isn't burdened by pregnancy, nursing, or chasing her own small toddlers, but who has a lifetime of wisdom, knowledge of medicinal plants, food sources, and can help raise the grandchildren, that is a massive survival advantage for the entire group.
So menopause isn't an ending, it's a promotion. You're being promoted to the role of tribal consultant and chief babysitter.
In a way, yes. Studies have shown that tribes with active, involved grandmothers had better survival rates for their children than tribes without them. So the gene for living long past menopause was strongly selected for.
So all of these crises, The midlife crisis, menopause, even puberty angst are controlled by timers that were set thousands and thousands of years ago on the African savanna.
That's the framework, yes.
Okay, so we have established that men are essentially modified females, chemically altered in the womb, and that our personalities are a mix and match buffet of these chemicals.
Correct. That's the foundation.
But now we have to circle all the way back to the beginning, the hook of the episode, the nipple.
The male nipple, yes.
We established that men have them because they started as the female template. But the source asks a follow-up question. If men are just souped-up females, as he puts it, can they function like females?
And this is the twist. This is where the biology gets truly, truly wild. And the answer, according to the source, is an unequivocal yes. Men can breastfeed.
Okay, I feel like half our listeners just swerved off the road. I'm going to need you to be very, very specific here. Men can breastfeed.
The source is categorical on this. The evidence is scattered, but the biological mechanism is absolutely there. Men possess all the necessary equipment. They have the nipples, they have the mammary glands underneath, and they have the pituitary gland in their brain that produces prolactin, the milk hormone.
So if all the parts are there, why don't they? I mean, aside from the obvious social and cultural reasons, what's the biological stop sign?
It's the liver.
The liver. I thought the liver just processed my Friday night beers.
It does, and that's actually directly relevant. The liver is the gatekeeper of the endocrine system. Normally, the human liver has a very important job. It detects female hormones, like estrogen, that are circulating in the male body, and men do have some estrogen naturally. And it suppresses them, it metabolizes them, and clears them out of the system.
So the liver is basically playing defense, saying, nope, not today, estrogen, we're a dude, get out.
That's a great way to think about it. It keeps the estrogen levels low, which in turn keeps the prolactin levels low.
But I hear a very big but coming.
But if the liver's compromised, if it's damaged, the gate opens. And the source explicitly mentions alcohol as a primary culprit.
Ah, the manly quaffs of Budweiser.
If a man damages his liver, with years of heavy drinking developing cirrhosis, for example, the liver fails to do its job suppressing those hormones. It gets too busy trying to detoxify the body and keep the organism alive to worry about filtering a little bit of estrogen.
So the estrogen levels start to rise.
They don't just rise, they can spike. And when estrogen spikes, it sends a signal to the pituitary gland. The result is that the man will start developing breast tissue, a condition called gynecomastia, and in extreme cases can actually start lactating.
The source has a very colorful phrase for this. Lactating like a male Dyak fruit bat.
Yes, the Dyak fruit bat is one of the very few mammals in the world where the male naturally lactates. But in humans, it usually requires liver failure. Or, and this is the most dramatic and well-documented example in the source, severe starvation followed by refeeding.
This was the example that really shocked me, the World War II prisoners. Can you tell that story?
This is a documented medical phenomenon, not just an anecdote. The source discusses a group of about 500 prisoners of war who were released from Japanese concentration camps at the end of World War II.
These men had been systematically starving for years.
For years. They were skeletal. Their bodies had shut down all non-essential functions to conserve energy. Their livers were functioning at the bare minimum level just to keep their hearts beating.
Okay.
Then the war ends. They're liberated, and suddenly they're well-fed. They're given food again.
They get access to calories, protein, everything they've been missing.
Huge amounts of calories. And their endocrine system, their hormone factories, woke up almost immediately. It roared back to life.
Right.
But the liver takes a very long time to heal from that kind of damage. It's a slow-healing organ.
So you have a serious mismatch in recovery time.
A massive mismatch. This is part of what we now call refeeding syndrome. The hormone factories started pumping out testosterone and estrogen again, but the liver was still too damaged and weak to filter the estrogen out. It hadn't recovered its gatekeeper function yet.
So the estrogen just flooded their systems, unchecked.
It did. And the result was that these survivors, these hardened soldiers who had just survived hell on earth, grew breasts and began to lactate.
That is just, it's wild. And tragic, of course, but it really proves the biological point, though. The machinery is there. It's just dormant, waiting for the inhibitor to be removed.
It completely confirms the source's central thesis. Inside every man is a woman trying to get out. Or, perhaps more accurately, the original female template is always present, just chemically suppressed. The male body is constantly doing active biological work to not be female.
Now, the source does admit at this point to moving from hard data to gossip. He mentions some anecdotal examples that are a bit harder to verify scientifically.
Yes, he calls humans a gossipy species for a reason. He mentions some anthropological reports of South American tribes where men will attach infants to their nipples for extended periods, specifically to induce lactation and help feed the baby.
Is that even possible just from mechanical stimulation?
Theoretically, yes. We know that constant stimulation of the nipple triggers the brain to release prolactin and oxytocin. It's a supply and demand feedback loop. If you demand it enough, the body might try to supply it. He also mentions reports of sensitive American men using breast pumps to try and share the nursing load with their partners.
And what about Couvade's syndrome? That's the sympathy pregnancy thing, right?
Right, where men who empathize so deeply with their partner's pregnancy that they themselves experience morning sickness, weight gain, labor contractions, and in very rare cases, even lactation. It shows the incredible power of the mind-body connection.
So whether those specific anecdotes are scientifically rigorous or not, the underlying biological point stands. The potential is there. We are not as fundamentally different as we think.
It is. The source concludes this entire section by saying men are only men titularly,
In name only.
in name only. And he issues a direct challenge to the listeners, or specifically to the female listeners. He says, if women can become athletes, CEOs, and lumberjacks, men can take a turn breastfeeding. Why not? You're the sex that invented males.
Talk about a mic drop moment. That's a powerful line.
It really puts the whole battle of the sexes into a very, very different perspective.
It really does. So let's try to synthesize all of this for everyone. We started with Aristotle and his student Theophrastus arguing about whether male nipples are useless.
And we found that Aristotle was right, in a way. They have a point. And the point is that the male body is built on a female chassis. The nipple is the proof, the artifact of our shared origin.
We learned about the pickling process, that series of precisely timed hormonal waves in the womb that turns the dial from female to male. But we also learned that those dials can be turned partially, not all the way.
Right. It's the buffet. You can have the body of a man and the emotional intuition of a woman. You can have the body of a woman and the spatial reasoning or aggression of a man. It's a mix and match system, not a set menu.
And finally, we learned that the liver is pretty much the only thing standing between most men and a nursing bra.
Which is a sentence I never thought I would say in a deep dive, but medically, it holds up.
It really reframes how we look at gender friction, doesn't it? The source says the problems between sperm makers and egg makers are just a side effect of a deeper, ancient solution for survival.
Right. The friction exists, of course it does. But underneath it all, there is a fundamental sameness. The source says men are fundamentally female, just souped up with fancy accoutrements. We are variations on a single theme, not polar opposites.
So let's bring it home. What does this all mean for us, for the listener driving to work right now or doing the dishes or at the gym? Why does knowing about the SRY gene or the liver's role in estrogen suppression actually matter in our daily lives?
I think it invites a certain level of introspection and maybe even empathy. We tend to view our identity, our aggression, our talents, our preferences as things we chose, or things that are core to our soul.
Right, things that define me.
Exactly. But looking at it through this biological lens suggests that a lot of who we are is just a result of chemical timing, a hormonal accident almost.
It's humbling, in a way. It takes the ego out of it.
It is. If you're a man with great spatial reasoning, maybe you didn't earn that. Maybe you just got a bigger wave of testosterone in week 8 of your development. If you're a guy who loves the Golden Girls and crying at weddings, maybe you just missed a particular wave. And that's okay. It's just biology.
It makes the lines we draw between us feel a lot blurrier, a lot less important.
And I think that's the beauty of it. The source argues that this diversity, this blurry middle ground, is an evolutionary strength. We aren't supposed to be carbon copies of two rigid, separate templates. We're supposed to be a messy, varied, improvised collection of survivors.
I want to leave the listener with a final thought today, a provocative one. We spend so much time and energy debating gender, identity, and biology in our culture right now. It is the hot-button topic of our time.
It is, absolutely.
But if we take this source material seriously, if the female template is the biological baseline for every single one of us, and if male differentiation is essentially just a chemical overlay that can be partial or incomplete or even reversible in some ways, like with the lactation, then how much of what we consider hard-coded gender identity is actually just a matter of chemical timing?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it?
So think about your own traits, your patience, your temper, your ability to read a map or your knack for reading a room. Don't think of them as you. Think of them as items you, or more accurately, your embryo picked from the prenatal buffet. And then ask yourself, if the chemical chef in the womb had been a little more heavy-handed with one ladle or a little stingier with another on one specific Tuesday 9 months before you were born, who would you be today?
That is a profound thing to wonder about.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you on the next wave.
Hey, curious.